Hey, y'all, it's Brandon Adams, the host of DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. Sorry about the late start. A little computer mishap on my end. Kind of got us off to a slow start today. But we're going to have a lot of fun on today's show. A couple special guests, which I'll tell you about. A lot of interesting discussion and fallout from the possibility of maybe Georgia and Clemson getting head-to-head together once again with a rivalry renewal. We'll do that. We'll talk about the possibility of Kirby Smart. I guess it's more than a possibility. Kirby Smart's new contract on the way, what that could mean for UGA. We will do it all next. We're glad you're with us. DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, begins right now.
From DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I'm really excited because we've got a special guest joining us on the show today that's never been on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza before. So I'm really looking forward to that. I'll tell you more about it coming up. Before we get to it, though, I am really excited about all this talk that's been kind of out there over the last few days about the possibility that Georgia and Clemson could get back together and renew their rivalry with each other. I've said before here on DawgNation Daily that I was a kid that kind of grew up during the 80s, loving Georgia football and going to Georgia football games. And for me back then, even though I'm like sort of thought of as the ultimate Gatorader now with good reason because I certainly want to be thought that way, but when I was a kid in the 80s, it was really that game against Clemson that was the one seemingly we had circled more than any other game back then. Over and over, year after year, that Georgia-Clemson game seemed to be pivotal. And so the idea that these two teams could get back together in the near future, I think is exciting. And even if it's just a short-term deal now, I mean, I've made the case before that I think these two teams should maybe look at figuring out a way to play every single season. To me, that would be very interesting. It'd be a step forward for both college football and for the two programs. And the reason why all of this is relevant right now is because of something that Dabo Swinney said a few days ago and something that Georgia Athletic Director Greg McGarity has now said in response after being asked about it. The Clemson Insider, which is a website that covers Clemson football, caught up with Swinney at one of these rubber chicken circuit, summer tour type things that coaches do this time of year, and they heard him be asked a question. I'm assuming it was from a fan who maybe has some friends who are Georgia fans or something along those lines. Hey, would you like to play Georgia some more? And what Dabo Swinney says is, I've said we should play Georgia for a long time. We're going to play somebody like that every year. We're going to go to Texas A&M this year, and then they come to us. We've played Auburn a bunch of times, so I think that would be great. I'm sure they're going to play somebody big every year. I don't know who they play this year, but I'm sure they have somebody out of their conference. To me, it would be great for the fan bases. That's Dabo Swinney, as quoted by the Clemson Insider. Now, what Dabo, I guess, is not aware of, unless he was just poking at Georgia, is the Dogs are kind of in between big-time non-conference games. It was the trip to Notre Dame for 2017, the Irish return trip coming up in 2019, but no game kind of like that for 2018. And I sort of get the impression that a lot of Georgia fans are kind of missing it a little bit. A lot of Georgia fans are sort of wishing they had that marquee non-conference game, either that trip to take or that big opponent to welcome into Athens. It sort of seems like that's kind of missing from the Georgia schedule right now, and it seems like some Georgia fans are saying, I liked it last year. I like going to South Bend, Indiana, and even if it cost a lot of money, and even if it was, a big hassle to sort of do that second week in September, it all worked out pretty well for the Dogs. It was a pretty fun trip while we were there. Well, the Athens Banner-Herald caught up with Greg McGarity on what Dabo Swinney had to say, asking him, hey, what do you think about the idea of Georgia and Clemson playing more? Now, I don't know if McGarity's just saying this as posturing or if it's something that he really believes, but he says, I do think down the road you're going to see Clemson and Georgia playing each other. That's Mark Weiser, Athens Banner-Herald, quoting that. I'm not sure about the frequency of it, but I do think you'll see us play each other in the not-too-distant future. As was pointed out in the story, I guess there's that hole in the schedule maybe for 2021 where these two teams could get together there. So you've got the head coach from Clemson. You've got the athletic director from Georgia talking about the idea of these two teams getting back together. I think it's a great idea. For me, it's a no-brainer. I guess it is worth pointing out here that not every Georgia fan agrees with this. I have heard from some Georgia fans online, either people who've reached out to me on Twitter at DawgNation Daily or people who've put some comments in our comment sections either on this program or on SEC Country Live saying, why would Georgia want to start playing Clemson more? It only helps Clemson because Clemson wants to do a lot of its recruiting in the state of Georgia. Why would you play a team? You're only sort of helping give them additional notoriety here. And I guess my response back to that is, the days of Georgia ignoring Clemson so that it doesn't help Clemson build its program, With all due respect, those days are over. I mean, Clemson's been in the college football playoff now 3 years in a row. They won the national championship a couple of years ago. Clemson as a program has arrived. They've been successfully recruiting in Atlanta now for quite some time. Georgia and Clemson are going to be going head-to-head against each other a lot here, so you might as well, if you're doing that in recruiting, you might as well do that on the field here as well. That's why I say embrace the game. And where I'm going to sort of part company with some Georgia fans, and some Georgia fans are going to start trying to beat me about the head on social media, is when I then go on to say, I want to see Georgia play Clemson so much, so badly, that if I had my choice, I'd replace the end-of-season series against Georgia Tech with a series like Clemson every single year. That's what I would do. Now, I still want to go out of conference and play, the trip games, if you want to call them that, the national tour type stuff against UCLA in a few years, or Notre Dame like Georgia did in 2017. I want to do some of that kind of stuff. But if you want that regional rival, if you want that out of conference game from, like, say, an ACC foe, for me, that ought to be Clemson more so than Georgia Tech. And it's not because Georgia Tech is incapable of beating Georgia. I mean, in the last couple of years, we've seen the Jackets do that. This is not about, Georgia Tech being a doormat as a program or whatever other inferiority complex that Tech fans might have in this given week or, given context, whatever else. This is more about the fact that Georgia and Georgia Tech seemingly are just traveling in sort of distant orbits when it comes to college football overall. Georgia's chasing down the 4- and 5-star prospects, the elite of elite recruits, building a giant, massive program with national reach and national recognition, and Tech is just playing a more meager brand of the sport. They are just playing in a sort of, lower, I hate to say lower classification, but they're not chasing after the same recruits. They're not chasing after the same sort of brand building. It's just two programs that seem to be moving in different directions. Clemson is a lot more commensurate with what Georgia is trying to do as a program. Therefore, I would say that's the kind of non-conference game, especially in the sort of regional sense, ACC foe, that Georgia ought to be playing a lot more than Georgia Tech. It's worth pointing out here, though, that someone who disagrees with me on this is my partner from SEC Country Live, my buddy Mike Johnson. When this subject came up on that show yesterday, Mike offered this rebuttal.
I have reservations about it. I really do. I look, and we talked about this a couple weeks ago, and I've kind of thought about it sometimes between now and then. First of all, the Georgia Tech thing for me is a special rivalry. I understand that Clemson's down the road, Georgia Tech's down the road too, and I hate this thought. For me, just a personal decision, I don't know if I'm with the kind of flavor of the week scheduling. You know what I mean? Like, the other thing for me is I'm a huge proponent of a 9-game conference schedule. Mm-hmm. I can't say it enough. The SEC's got to move to a 9-game conference schedule. It's ridiculous to me that Alabama and Georgia play twice in a 10-year span, or whatever it is, 8-year span. I mean, I think that's absolutely ridiculous. Let's go to a 9-game schedule, get rid of one of these, basically Division II games that some of these teams are playing over the year. Alabama's as guilty of as anybody, so is Georgia, so is everybody else in the SEC. Get rid of one of them, load up another SEC team, let's get the 9-game schedule rolling. So with that all in mind, do you really want to add Clemson at the beginning or at the end of the year every year? That makes it become a little more shaky.
I play that audio even though I disagree with what Mike's saying, because I'm pretty sure his words there are almost exactly what some of you are shouting at your device right now, whether you watch on a laptop or a desktop or on your phone, iPad, whatever. You are shouting in the direction of that device exactly what Mike just said, that maybe for some people, to use Mike's phrase, that scheduling Clemson more is flavor of the month scheduling and ignoring a series like Georgia Tech that's gone on for decades and decades and decades. I get that. I also think Mike makes a relevant point when he says that maybe the real answer here is a 9-game SEC schedule as opposed to anything else. And there's some merit to that, and that's probably something we'll talk about more in a different day and different time. I think for right now, though, the place where college football is moving is towards more of these non-conference games in home-and-home environments. As much fun as the Chick-fil-A kickoff is, and the game in Dallas, the game in Orlando, and all these games that get played week one, those non-conference neutral site environments, I don't think that's the next phase of college football scheduling. I think people saw what Georgia did last year against Notre Dame and the thousands upon thousands of fans who traveled there, and I think they want to see more of that in college football. An example of that is Alabama coach Nick Saban, whose program, on the heels of seeing Georgia go to Notre Dame, decided it wanted to do the same thing, and recently Saban talked about the idea of these home-and-home type games.
I think the philosophy has always been that, we want to add at least one quality opponent to our schedule. And other than the Penn State home since I've been here, we've never been able to get that worked out like we want to. Our administration is working really hard on it. So consequently, we've played in a lot of the neutral site games to get a good opponent. And I know you guys have heard about some of the things that we're working on, but when we have something to report on that, we'll be glad to tell you about it. But I don't really have anything to report on it right now.
At the time, Saban had nothing more to add, but we now know a decade from now, Notre Dame and Alabama will play a home-and-home series, and that's what college football is going to look like in the future. The cupcakes in the schedule, I think they're all about to disappear in the years ahead. And Chip Towers last year on DawgNation Daily made that point pretty emphatically, that tougher scheduling across the board for Georgia, for Clemson, for Alabama, for Notre Dame, everybody, he thinks it's on the way. Here is Chip.
I think it's up to Georgia to schedule tough. I really get tired of hearing the narrative about the schedule's going to be too tough. And we're at a point in sports, in athletics, where they better suck it up and start giving it back to the fans pretty soon, or they're going to lose the fans altogether. Attendance is an issue. You know, pretty soon people are going to start tuning this stuff out. Nobody wants to line up and lay down a bunch of cash to go see Louisiana Lafayette. And every once in a while, you'll look at Georgia's schedule. His home schedule is pretty bad.
So who should Georgia be playing? The kinds of opponents that Chip would like to see from the non-conference variety? Here are the suggestions that he offered some time ago.
That's up to Georgia. They have quality control in their hands. I think you ought to be playing Notre Dame, Ohio State, Michigan, UCLA, Southern Cal, Oregon, Arizona State. I don't care who it is. It's not like everything should be about lining up your schedule so that you could be in position to win the national championship. If you're having to put patsies in there to do that, then you're not a national championship contender, in my opinion.
So here's the bottom line for the discussion for me. Right now, Georgia has 8 conference games, and as Mike Johnson said, maybe one day it's 9, but for now it's 8. What do you want to do then with those 4 non-conference opponents? Do you want to keep the Tech rivalry at the end of the season every single year? Do you want your non-conference high-profile game to be a regional rival against Clemson, or a sort of national travel trip like a Texas, Michigan, or a Notre Dame? For me, in the future, I think it's going to be both and. I think that schedules are just going to get tougher across the board, and that's a brand of college football that I embrace. But for now, it'll be fun to watch how this takes shape for UGA. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented by Marco's Pizza, and we're glad you're with us, whether you watch us on video, DawgNation Facebook, DawgNation YouTube, DawgNation Twitter, every morning at 10 a.m., the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, or in podcast form, Apple Podcasts, Android devices, SoundCloud, the world-famous DawgNation.com. We're just glad you found DawgNation Daily, and super happy to have Marco's Pizza with us as a part of the program. And right now, Marco's wants you to say hello to Primo Moments at a great value with Marco's. You can get 2 medium, 2 topping pizzas for an everyday price of just $7.99. That's at marcos.com to get that great everyday price of just $7.99 each for those 2 medium, 2 topping pizzas. Good to have Marco's Pizza with us on the program here today. We are busy today on DawgNation Daily. A lot to get to here in terms of a couple guests. Later on, we're going to get more into Jay Hayes, the graduate transfer from Notre Dame, who's going to be a part of the Georgia roster here in 2018. We're going to talk to Mike Frank, our buddy from Irish Sports Daily, who we had on last year's way of previewing the Georgia-Notre Dame game. He'll give us some insight on Jay Hayes coming up a little later on here. And I'm also really excited about welcoming in, for the very first time to DawgNation Daily, Kevin Butler, the Hall of Fame kicker for the Georgia Bulldogs, who is about to get his degree from UGA and has great insight on the team because he's been there at practice and been a part of what's going on there. Kevin's going to be a great guest here for us on DawgNation Daily coming up in a couple of minutes, and I'm really, really looking forward to that. Before we get to that, though, let me squeeze in one more quick thing. Actually, a couple more quick things. First of all, I know many of you were excited yesterday when we unveiled our DawgNation Retaliation T-shirts with the 28-7 score as a response to a certain group of fans who've been crowing a lot against UGA fans on social media this week. For that Auburn fan in your life who never seems to shut up and never seems to let you off the hook about stuff like what happened this week with 5-star linebacker Owen Papo, the DawgNation Retaliation T-shirt and a reminder of what happened during December is a perfect way for you to respond to them. And we're going to give a lot of these away by the end of the week, or by Monday. I hope to be able to fully explain more about exactly how that's going to go and exactly what that's going to be like. But please stick with us here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. Friday and Monday, I'm going to talk more about the process for how we're going to give as many of these away as we can to folks inside the state of Georgia. I know many of you outside the state of Georgia are wondering about the same stuff. We will give you a chance to do that. Let me also quickly squeeze in one more subject. And I was going to play some more audio for you from Kirby Smart. I'm not going to have time to do that. But let me just quickly mention that it looks like, according to some stuff that came out from UGA yesterday, Kirby Smart's about to get a big contract extension. At least that seems to be on the way here. And, frankly, the business of college football and how much money Kirby Smart makes is really not all that interesting to me overall. I honestly can't tell you how much Kirby Smart's making right now. I'm sure it's millions and millions of dollars. I don't know if it's 3. I don't know if it's 5. That, for me, is not altogether all that interesting. He obviously deserves a big raise. I hope they give him a huge one, and I'm sure he'll be happy with it. What is interesting to me about Georgia finances, though, is the more money you pay Kirby Smart, the more you also increase the threshold for who you can pay and how much you can pay the Georgia assistants. And that's what really matters here. If you want to stay in the championship business, you got to be paying your coaches well. Kirby's going to get his big raise, and that opens the door for assistants to kind of get paid what they're supposed to get paid and keep pace with the rest of college football, and that's good news here. We are glad you're with us here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. We told you we are super busy on today's program. Let's keep it rolling right now as we welcome in the College Football Hall of Famer, the great former Georgia kicker, and a terrific analyst, Kevin Butler, here to DawgNation Daily. And I will say hello to him now. He is Kevin Butler. You know him as a big part of Georgia football for quite some time, and he's about to get his degree from UGA here, too, which is quite an accomplishment given everything that he has going on. Kevin, thanks for your time. Thanks for being a part of your first ever appearance here on DawgNation Daily. We appreciate you being with us this morning. How are you doing?
Up with you guys.
Yeah, thanks. It's great to have you here. And I guess let me say congratulations on the degree you're about to earn. What's it been like going back to school and kind of doing this over the last couple of years, kind of after the time? How's it been being back in class, and how good's it going to feel to have that cap and gown on?
Well, it's really been a neat experience. Stepping back in there 33 years later, technology's changed. It was quite a grasp at first, but I kind of settled in there. I've been doing it for the last 2 years, kind of pacing it out to try to fit the school in between my business and just family and football and everything. And it's been quite an experience. I'm awful proud of it. It's just something that, I think when you get a chance to go on to the NFL like I did, we had some great success in Chicago, my rookie year, and that really just gave me an opportunity to stay around there and to, start that chapter of my life. But this is one chapter that I always really wanted to close, and that'll happen tomorrow night.
I'm sure it's an inspiring story for many people, because a lot of people are doing exactly what you're trying to do, manage a college career at the same time, handling a business and, professional obligations and things like that. So I'm sure you're an inspiration to many on that. But from a football standpoint, while you have been going to school, you've also been working, as everyone is well aware, as a sort of a graduate assistant coach there at Georgia, working with the specialists and the kickers. And I guess a lot of Georgia fans are going to be curious here. What's going to happen to your coaching career once that degree's given to you tomorrow night?
Well, that's a great question. I can't answer that. Right now, there's no plans for Georgia to bring me back. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. And, the degree might be able to give me some opportunity. I think I've proven myself certainly valuable to the University of Georgia football team. I think I've proven myself valuable to the kickers and the punters and the snappers. I think they've enjoyed having that structure that really you don't get unless you have somebody that can specialize and coach and teach kickers and punters, because it's not a job that, especially team coach per se. Scott Fountain, who is a great specialty team coach, I'm so happy we hired him, and that certainly shows, and it's going to show in the specialty team performance. But when you get down to, starting to coach kickers and punters, I think the advantage that I certainly have over just about anybody that's out there is I've done it. I've done it at all levels, and I understand the mental challenge that goes into it. And I also understand that, the structure that you can provide a kicker and a punter and snappers during practice really builds the confidence. And that's really what carries these young men through games that sometimes get a little stressful and may not go the way that they need to go, but it's good to have somebody down there that can talk to them and keep them mentally in the right state of mind and, based on what they've done during the week in practice. As I've always told Coach Smart, there's no magical field that you send kickers over to during practice to get them out of the way, and then they come back better kickers. It just doesn't work like that. And structure, I think, is what I've brought to the team, and I think Coach Smart has really appreciated that.
Well, we've certainly seen your impact on Rodrigo Blankenship, who, since you've been around the program, we've seen Rodrigo become really one of the top kickers in college football. How personally gratifying is it for you, and what have you seen from Rodrigo watching him up close during practice where he really was a big part of that college football playoff story for Georgia a year ago. The kick at the end of the half against Oklahoma in the Rose Bowl, and really being a sure thing for Georgia. Anytime that Kirby had to sort of turn to him. How much fun has it been for you watching Rodrigo go from a guy that had to earn the kicking job eventually to being a guy that has become a real fan favorite for a lot of Georgia fans now?
Well, it was very exciting, and I think that's really where my love and my desire to do this on an ongoing basis is come from. When you work with somebody like Rodrigo and William Ham last year, 2 years ago, he had beat Rodrigo out in preseason, and Rodrigo was struggling a little bit there. But I think once he understood that there was a challenge out there, just like at every other position, I think Rodrigo has just matured as a kicker and a young man, and he is the hardest worker out there. Anything that I ask Rodrigo to do, he will do it at 110%. And I think that's really the advantage. When a young kid at any position opens up his mind and allows himself to be coached and accepts, whether it's recommendations or just starting new habits, I think that's really where these kids start to blossom, and Rodrigo has done that. He's a hard worker. He's a very good kicker, very strong. And when he got that, when Coach Smart awarded him the scholarship prior to the Notre Dame game, nobody knew about that. I didn't know about it, and he let it out after the end of the game. And Rodrigo played such a big part in that game. And he had a miss, and then he came back and just performed like a true kicker should. So. It's been wonderful to watch him develop, and certainly, as you said, he's going into this year as one of the top kickers in the nation.
What do you think about the rule changes in college football that have, at least seemingly potentially, diminished the importance of special teams when you think about the kickoffs that can now be fair caught, and that's going to give almost like touchback field position to the opposing team? Kevin, I obviously understand the importance of player safety, and I do realize that kick returns are seemingly the most dangerous play in any in any game. But do you ever worry that by changing the role of special teams so much that we're making sort of fundamental changes to the nature of college football here?
Well, absolutely. I think there's strategy to kickoffs. There's strategy to onside kicks. There's strategies to either fair catching or trying to break that play and make a big return and give your offense some valuable field position. And there's nothing from a fair catch standpoint that's going to stop the collisions that happen in that first 30 to 45 yards, and that's still going to happen no matter what, if somebody's waving for a fair catch or not. So I think they failed miserably on that one. I think that any time that you change a rule, you have to have good and bad for each side. There's got to be some strategy to it, and right now it just favors the return team. It doesn't help the kickoff team at all. I'd like to, at least if they'd have seen, if you do fair catch the ball, you get it at the 25. If you don't make a first down in those first 3-4 plays, there should be a penalty. You go 10 yards back before you can punt the ball, because right now it's just an advantage for the return team, and that's not how a game should be played. It should never be skewed towards one side.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, Kevin. I think that's actually a pretty interesting rule idea to potentially consider. Obviously, you're a great analyst. You've been covering Georgia football for a long time. We've been hearing on the radio for really a great long time covering Georgia football. Georgia comes off of what I think of as a pretty successful spring here, heading towards the summer. What are your thoughts on the team right now, just overall? You know, playoff a year ago, spring here, heading into a 2018 season where there are going to be a lot of high expectations. Where do you see Kirby Smart in year 3 here?
Well, you know what? I'm just excited about the overall attitude and the tempo and what the coaches demand and what the players also demand of themselves. I think that's the biggest thing that I've seen change in the Kirby Smart era, that responsibility falls squarely on the players' shoulders. They're given all the tools to be ready. They're given all the tools to be at their strongest. They're given all the tools to be as knowledgeable as they need to be at those positions, and it's really up to the players to respond to that. And I think Georgia, to every player, has really accepted that challenge, and that's really how you build a championship team. You have to have everybody buy into the system. The new system that Kirby brought in was just much more detailed, and I think you see that in his recruiting process. I think you see that in his the way that they control practice, the way that they go about Saturdays as a business, not as something that's just going to go out there and have fun. You're going to have to be 110% focused. You're going to have to be 110% ready at your position, because if you don't, you let down the guy next to you, and that's something that every championship team I've ever been on, that is the underlining factor. You are responsible to yourself and to your teammates, and Georgia has really accepted that, and I think that's something that Kirby just demands on a daily basis.
I want to finish in just a moment by asking you about one of the great moments you had in a Georgia uniform. Before that, though, let me squeeze in something else. Obviously, we saw Roquan Smith get drafted by the Chicago Bears, the team that you know very well. You lived up in Chicago and a great member of the '85 Bears Super Bowl team. Any advice that you've given Roquan about living in Chicago? You know, when you grew up in Montezuma, Georgia, I guess Chicago, Illinois can maybe be a good bit different than that. What would you tell Roquan about living in the Windy City?
Well, you know, they're so excited. I've been doing a lot of interviews the past week with his selection up to Chicago. I've told them that they have one of the best all-around individuals that came out of this draft. I can't tell you how fun it's been for me to get to know Roquan, his work ethic and his attitude and just the type of young man he is. I think he fits totally into what Chicago looks for, and especially when you talk about linebacker, you know. Chicago's had a lot of great running backs going back to Gale Sayers, Walter Payton, Red Grange, but when you go back to that linebacker position, you know, it starts with the old Doug Buffone and Dick Butkus and Mike Singletary and Brian Urlacher, and I just really believe that they have the next piece to that puzzle in Roquan. I think he is that type of a player. I think he's that new type of a linebacker that certainly speed is his probably his biggest advantage. He's a very smart player. He knows what's going on with all the positions out there, and that's where you build confidence. So he's got the world by the tail. I told him no matter how cold it gets up there, that as a linebacker, he's got to go out there and keep those arms open. He can't put any sleeves on his arms. So that's the only thing I told him. I said, cold is all part of your mind when you're out there playing, and the Bear fans love to see that linebacker out there with no sleeves on and getting physical.
That is great advice from a guy that knows it well, having had to try to kick in some of that wind for a long time. All right, let me finish with this. Before you joined us, Kevin, we talked a lot about Greg McGarry's recent comments, Dabo Swinney's recent comments, but the idea that Georgia and Clemson would get back together, renew that rivalry. You know the Georgia-Clemson rivalry maybe as well or better than anybody. One of the great moments for Georgia during the decade of the 80s was the 60-yard field goal that you kicked to beat Clemson back in the middle of that decade. Obviously, a lot of Georgia fans have great memories of that rivalry then, you in the game. What do you think about Georgia-Clemson? Obviously, I think we'd all love to see it on a short-term basis. I've even gone so far as to say I'd like to see it on a long-term basis. Would you like to see Georgia and Clemson play more?
I certainly would. I mean, it's great for college football. It's great for this region. These two programs right now are, top 5 perennial programs in the nation. So anytime that you can match those two teams up, you're going to see some great college football, and certainly our fans deserve it. Clemson's fans deserve it. Back in the 80s, the 4 years I can remember, it was Clemson or Georgia was up there for the national championship, winning it in 80 and 81, and turn around and losing it in 82, and Clemson was right there in 83, 84. So, the tradition is there. The only thing that I would really to start a year-to-year Clemson, parts to go to Alabama. So that's two things you got to be aware of. If he has Alabama, he just put each other for every year. So look at the long-term effects out of it, but I'll be there, and it'll be a great game if it's in Death Valley or if it's between the hedges.
Hey, that's great stuff, Kevin. We really appreciate you being here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. You got a lot of fans in our audience, and it's certainly been great to talk some football with you today. Congratulations on the degree, the graduation ceremony here coming up, and I'll look forward to hopefully getting a chance to speak to you again soon.
Look forward to it, guys. Keep up the great work.
That is Kevin Butler there, the Hall of Fame former kicker for the Georgia Bulldogs, and really good stuff with them. Lost a little bit of that final answer there on the Clemson series. And what's frustrating about that is it sounded like he was really kind of getting into some interesting stuff about kind of what he'd like to see that rivalry be like. And it's a great guy to get a chance to talk to on stuff like this, given the fact that, his legend at Georgia in a lot of ways was built on that Georgia-Clemson game. I was a pretty young guy, I will admit, back in 1984 when he kicked the 60-yard field goal, but certainly I know those stories, and I remember the conversations about that. Obviously, a lot of people are very familiar with the Louis Grizzard column that got written by the coming on the heels of that. So there's a lot of history for Georgia-Clemson. I remember going to those games in the 80s. It was an early season game back then, and one of those deals where you really had it circled. And for me, it'd be a lot of fun to see it renewed again. And in thinking about some of those great moments and those great memories, it makes talking to Kevin Butler here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, awful fun. I'm really proud of him for getting his degree. I'm very appreciative of the work that he's done with the Georgia Kickers over the last couple of years, and it sounds like he'd like to stay involved, and I hope he gets a chance to do just that.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Really fun to have Kevin Butler here on DawgNation Daily today. I always love when we can sort of bring on somebody for the very first time. We obviously have a great stable of folks that we talk to quite a bit. Guys like Chip Towers and guys like Jeff Sintel, and their insight is invaluable. We feel that way, but it's fun to also be able to talk to some new voices, and Kevin Butler's certainly one of those, and it was a really fun thing to be able to have him on DawgNation Daily here today. By the way, as we transition to our SEC Through, I'll remind you of a couple of things. SEC Country Live, 3 p.m. Eastern Time this afternoon. I look forward to seeing you on the SEC Country video channels if you have a chance to join us for that. I'll also remind you that Kroger's getting ready for the big Cinco de Mayo celebrations going on this weekend, and right now they've got Cinco de Mayo digital deals for just 4 days only. You can download coupons. Those started yesterday. You can redeem them May 2nd through May 5th. Find extra savings, recipes, and more at Kroger.com/Cinco de Mayo. So a big-time weekend coming up. Kroger's got you covered for all of that. Bunch of SEC teams show up in the way too early top 25 from ESPN. Mark Schlabach does this. I like the ESPN version of this because they change theirs. I say that from time to time. That for me is always fun. It's not just one of these sort of static preseason top 25s. It just sort of stays the same the entire time. They altered after signing day. They altered after the early entrants declared for the NFL draft. They altered again after the spring. Even if some of the alterations don't quite make 100% sense, it's still sort of fun to have it as a talking point. ESPN has moved Alabama back to number 1 over Clemson. The reasoning for this is seemingly faulty logic. We didn't see Tua Tagovailoa during the spring, but Mark Schlabach, the writer, who I think is super sharp and a smart guy, and I think he's giving a gift to all of us. I think the way too early top 25 is fun. But his thought that somehow Tua is now more solid the Alabama quarterback after a spring in which he didn't practice, it would certainly turn some heads for some people who don't probably follow this stuff on the 12-month basis the way that we all do. He leapfrogs them over Clemson, a team that we've talked about a lot on the show already today. I got to push back against the narrative, though, that, we heard this from, what's his name? Trent Dilfer the other day, the Elite 11 quarterback coach, former quarterback in the NFL, won a Super Bowl with the Baltimore Ravens, that Tua Tagovailoa is somehow a quarterback that's so good. He's never going to lose a game in college. They can win every game 50-3, and kind of on and on with the praise that Trent Dilfer was giving. A lot of that's ridiculous to me for a couple of reasons. First of all, in a couple of years, Dilfer will be given the same praise that some other Elite 11 quarterback. This is just what he does. He hypes the Elite 11, and therefore the best way to do that is brag on all the Elite 11 quarterbacks. He has been given and prone to hyperbole with a lot of his quarterbacks in the past. Tua may be the latest example of that. But in college football right now, just because you're way better than Jalen Hurts does not mean you're way better than every other quarterback, including the two at Georgia, Jake Fromm and Justin Fields, who I believe I'd be more than happy to take either one of them over Tua Tagovailoa right now. And for the team that Schleybaugh leapfrogged Alabama over, Clemson, well, Trevor Lawrence is a pretty good-looking incoming freshman there, too. Being way better than Jalen Hurts does not guarantee that Tua is way better than Trevor Lawrence, who I do think will eventually be the quarterback for Clemson this season. Georgia does come in at number 4 on this list. They get leaped by Ohio State. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But 3, 4, ultimately, I guess it doesn't really matter all that much. As long as you're in the college football playoff conversation, it matters, do you beat Alabama head-to-head? And if you do, that's going to be your ticket from the SEC championship game into the postseason there. Gus Malzahn, speaking at one of these summer speaking circuit tour type events, says that Jarrett Stidham's going to be fully healthy, fully ready to go for the summer practices after really being very limited during the spring. He did throw some, but did not play in the A-Day game, did not really do a whole lot in the way of scrimmaging. Not a surprise to hear that he's going to be fully healthy and fully ready to go. And my expectation is that he has a good season. I said on SEC Country Live yesterday, in that season opener, which I think is going to get a lot of attention between Auburn and Washington, Jake Browning comes back for Washington, Stidham for Auburn. I'm going to give Stidham the advantage over Browning there in that game. And frankly, even though Washington's going to get some playoff hype this offseason, I think Auburn beats Washington in Atlanta in week 1. There is drama still for Tennessee. Beverly Davenport has been fired as Tennessee chancellor, coming on the heels of the John Curry firing and then the way the Greg Schiano near hire was botched. Jimmy Hyams was the first to report this. Hyams is been a writer for Gridiron Now and a radio host there in Tennessee. He broke this story on Twitter yesterday, and I think if you're Tennessee, what you're hopeful of is that the drama can finally be put to bed with the Davenport dismissal. She cost Tennessee a lot of money, and that's probably ultimately why she lost her job. Let me also quickly squeeze in one more quick story here. I thought the website The Spun was kind of funny, ranking the ugliest helmets in college football. A couple Georgia rivals come in 1 and 2 on the list. The Swamp Thing Florida helmets and the Smoky Gray Tennessee helmets viewed as the ugliest helmets in college football, according to The Spun. I know a lot of Georgia fans who would agree, and we'll make that your SEC through. Let me also transition here and welcome in a guy that's been a great friend of us here on DawgNation Daily over the last year. We talked to him a couple of times a few months ago as Georgia got ready to travel to South Bend to take on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. That was a memory many Georgia fans won't forget, and Mike Frank helped us get ready for the game from Irish Sports Daily. He joins us back here again today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza for a different reason. But, Mike, it's great to welcome you back to the program again today. How are you?
Doing great, Brandon. Anytime, man. Anytime.
Well, we're certainly thrilled to have you, and I think a lot of Georgia fans are thrilled to have a former Irish player getting ready to hopefully suit up for the Dogs this fall. That's Jay Hayes, who was at one point in time a Oklahoma commit, coming off the decision to be a grad transfer from Notre Dame. Georgia gets him to flip after the visit to G-Day back in April, and in the game against Georgia, Hayes had 7 tackles, and it sounds like in 2017 he kind of came on more in terms of his career there in South Bend compared to what it had been in his previous seasons there in a Notre Dame uniform. What can you tell Georgia fans about what they should expect from Jay Hayes?
Well, Jay Hayes is a very good run defender, and let me phrase that in saying he's a very good run defender when he wants to be. And I think it's been kind of the big problem with Jay is, consistency and, making sure that he's motivated and ready to go. And to be honest, I was kind of surprised that he transferred. I don't think he's loved his time at Notre Dame. I think he's felt like, he should be starting for quite a while and was last year. But Notre Dame has a younger player that's pretty good that's starting to emerge, and I just think he didn't feel like he wanted to split time with him. Clyde Kareem's a much better pass rusher Jay Hayes, and that's something that Notre Dame needs, and he's becoming a very good run defender as well. So I think Jay saw that he'd probably be splitting time at best, and that's why he bounced out. But Jay's a really tough run defender. He sets the edge extremely well. When he's motivated to play, he's a very, very good player, and he's a big loss for Notre Dame, no question.
Well, I think that you're sort of giving Georgia fans music to their ears, even if it comes with the caveat of, hey, a guy that wasn't always 100% motivated, or a guy that maybe had a hard time finding a spot on the field for a little while. Georgia, Mike, is thin with its own run defense right now. Kirby Smart was concerned about that during the spring. So the idea for Georgia being able to add some depth, even if it's in a sort of a rotational situation, at this point in time, Jay Hayes may be, based on your description, just what Georgia needs, even if it wasn't completely working out for him there at South Bend. And I think you've been covering college football long enough to certainly understand that.
Yeah, no question. And I think with Jay, too, it's a lot of times he shows up biggest in the biggest game, and he'll be playing plenty down there in Georgia. So, I think that's going to be a good thing for him, too, and his consistency is knowing that each game that he'll be playing, or a lot of the games he'll be playing, will be big games. And I think as long as he's getting an opportunity and he's happy down there, he should be a very good addition to you guys. If he, if it doesn't start out well, I don't know how he'll react. But in the past, if things haven't gone well, he kind of has gone in the tank before. And I think he's just looking for an opportunity to get more playing time. And I will say he's a very, very great, very nice kid. He's very funny, just great personality, and so I wish him the best. And I think he has a lot of potential, and I think he'll help you guys quite a bit.
So I'm curious, while we have you on the phone here, obviously for Georgia fans, that trip to Notre Dame back in September was one of the great memories of really all time. So many fans who went to Chicago, South Bend, which is a beautiful campus, as you're well aware. What's the memory of Notre Dame fans on this? I know it's obviously not going to be as fun for Georgia because of the fact that the Irish lose the game there, but what was the reaction to the large collection of Georgia fans and just the response from Notre Dame overall to the trip for UGA up to South Bend?
Well, I think first of all, the fans, the Notre Dame fans, thought the Georgia fans were very good fans. Hey, a lot of times you never know with fans coming in what you're going to get, but I think that the Irish fans really felt like the Georgia fans were very cordial and just really enjoyed the whole experience. I think, obviously, that people were a little embarrassed. That's the problem with Notre Dame. When you have your fan base is spread completely way far out, it's hard to get there. So what will happen is a lot of times people will have season tickets, and they may be out in California. Well, they can't make it to all 7 home games. So a lot of times what people will do is sell a high-priced ticket, on the secondary market to pay for the rest of the trips to Notre Dame. And I think that's what happened in this particular Georgia game. They knew that the demand was so high that it was hard for them to turn down. Me personally, I didn't like seeing it, and I think anybody who sells their ticket to pay for others, really isn't a fan. I don't think you want to let the opposition in. And did it impact the game? I think it probably did a little bit, certainly. Regardless, it was a fantastic game. Georgia definitely deserved to win. I thought they played the best out of the two teams, and I thought it was a great atmosphere all the way around.
It's ironic that we have you on here today because we were actually talking about the 2019 game against Notre Dame a couple of minutes ago. I'm sure there are a lot of Irish fans, many of which who, by the way, live in the Atlanta area. I'm sure that's a huge hub for Notre Dame. A lot of Notre Dame fans looking forward to being in Sanford Stadium in 2019, I'm guessing.
Well, I think no, to be honest with you, because I think everybody knows that Notre Dame's going to get killed in that game. When you look at Georgia, I mean, they're just recruiting ridiculous right now. And, I've seen it before where sometimes when you get so many 5 stars, it's really hard to keep everybody happy. But I think it's still pretty new for what's going on there at Georgia. So I expect them to be just a dominating team by that time. And Notre Dame will still be good. I'm sure they'll put up a good fight, but that's going to be. I know I'm not going because I don't want to pay to watch them lose.
Well, Mike, it is always fun to have you on the program, whether you make the trip or not. I'm sure we'll have you back on to talk about the game for sure. You do a great job covering Notre Dame athletics, and it's always fun to have you here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza.
Thanks, Brandon. Anytime, call me anytime.
Good stuff there, Mike Frank, a good guy covering Notre Dame, and with Georgia bringing in Jay Hayes as a Notre Dame grad transfer. I wanted to have Mike on to kind of talk about some of that. He gave you some really interesting insight and pretty candid description of Jay Hayes, who I think can really help Georgia here this year. Obviously, we've talked about non-conference games a lot on the show today. Let's talk about a quick conference game before we get ready to wrap up, and you know which one I'm talking about here. 177 days from right now, the rivalry that we think is supposed to matter for Georgia more than any other, whether it be a non-conference rival, an in-conference rival, for us it doesn't matter. A good Georgia fan is a Gator hater, first and foremost. Our buddy Eddie here on the stage with us every day agrees, and we think 177 days from right now, Georgia goes back to Jacksonville, gets another win over Florida. It's our Gator Hater Countdown every single day here on DawgNation Daily. Good stuff from Jeff Sintel at DawgNation.com, by the way. Really interesting insight into that Owen Pappoe decision. There's more of that at DawgNation, and we'll see you more tomorrow here on DawgNation Daily as well. And for those of you on video, we'll look forward to having some of your comments after a pretty busy show there. Good stuff from Mike Frank. Really fun to have Kevin Butler on the program here today as well. That was terrific. Terrific stuff. We'll look forward to getting a bunch of comments here. Mickey Hands on Owen Pappoe. Kind of weighing in on that. Justin Sisk says no more Pappoe. I thought that what Nolan Smith said on Twitter about that situation was pretty interesting, and I was going to try to get into that a little bit more if I had more time, but just did not quite have enough time on that. Some of y'all giving some great Munson lines here in the Facebook comment section. That's kind of interesting to see. Miriam Martin Corbin says, what an amazing legend Larry Munson was. Yeah, no doubt about that. Thinking about the 84 Kevin Butler Georgia Clemson game, I'm sure gets you thinking about Larry Munson. Some really good stuff on all that. Al Clements asks, do we really need Owen Pappoe with all the linebackers we have? Our coaching staff's going to make all of our linebackers great. I certainly think they're going to make the guys that are great on the roster, but I think you want to be as talented as you can be. I think you want as many 5-star guys as you can get. I think Pappoe is one that Georgia can get, and I think eventually it will get him, and I hope that Georgia fans are just as eager to welcome him into the program come December as I will be. Terrence Eberhardt asked what Nolan Smith said. Nolan Smith tweeted about Kenyatta Watson Sr. There had been some online chatter that Watson Sr., for various reasons, was the one that was steering people away from Georgia. Nolan Smith, who apparently has a relationship with Mr. Watson, was saying that was not the case, that Kenyatta Watson Sr. had been hugely influential for a lot of recruits, and Nolan Smith said, who is, by the way, a proud UGA commit, that Kenyatta Watson Sr. had never attempted to steer him away from Georgia, kind of rebutting what had been some sort of internet message board online chatter about Kenyatta Watson Sr., the father of the player that committed to Texas right before Pappoe committed to Auburn on TV and on SEC Country Live. It was that guy's dad that some people had blamed for Pappoe choosing Auburn over Georgia, and Nolan Smith went on Twitter and said that was not true. It was really interesting, really interesting. Good to see Stephen Burton checking in on the show. Stephen, good to have you with us here today. Kathy Aquavia Green says, I hope he flips, but we'll be fine if not. I think that's probably true. I agree with you on both fronts on that. Let me pop over to YouTube here for a moment. Get some YouTube comments. Kanan Bird on YouTube kind of agreeing with what the previous commenter said. Jacob Mahaffey says in the Sintel Intel piece that Watson Sr. said he feels Pappoe will end up at Georgia eventually, which is certainly fair. Marquez King on Facebook says, on YouTube says, the New England Patriots like the Alabama recruiting now. Go Dogs. Certainly a lot of Georgia players have been added into the fold there for New England as of late. Enrique Murillo says as long as Jay Hayes is consistent, he has the opportunity to be a higher draft pick, especially now that Georgia has a lot of eyes on the program. That's probably true. I did think it was interesting that Mike Frank, who's watched Jay Hayes a lot, sort of questions the consistent motivation for Hayes there. I think that's one of those areas in which Trey Scott can certainly be a big help, where Mel Tucker, Kirby Smart can be a big help there. They obviously brought him in because they see an opportunity for him to play, and and maybe that carrot of, hey, as somebody else said a moment ago, show out here. You may be on your way to the NFL. That may be all the motivation he needs to really sort of have it all lock in for him in a Georgia uniform. Austin Kilby says, what was my favorite Munson call? I think for me, it was probably the hobnail boot, and I'll tell you why. For like blue to sky and some of those type of things, look at the sugar falling for the sky. I was sort of, by the time I came of age as a Georgia fan, they had already happened. And, you hear about them as a part of the lore. My grandfather, my dad's dad, was a big Georgia fan. He would play these things for us. Hey, you want to hear this, you want to hear that. And there was always this almost like, it's weird to say it this way, but almost like a tinge of jealousy in that happened to sort of a previous generation of Georgia fans. It had just been a couple of years before. I really became a big Georgia fan as a child around the mid-'80s. But the 82 Georgia-Auburn game with the look at the sugar falling from the sky had already happened. The 1980 call from the Georgia-Florida game had already happened. And, at the time that I was hearing these things, the Georgia team on the field then was not that great. I mean, at least in terms of winning the SEC championship and, being back in the Sugar Bowl, those teams weren't that. So there was a sense of almost feeling like I had missed out on the big moments, that when were they going to come back around again? I felt like I'd sort of missed out on those. But in 2001, I was, kind of fresh out of college, or pretty close to being fresh out of college, and I was at that game. And when you're at the game, I never listened to the game on like headphones in the stadium. For some reason, I just never did that. So I didn't know about the call. I lived through the game, celebrated the David Green to Verron Haynes touchdown, had great seats that day, some of the best seats I've ever had for any game in terms of being like right there, kind of behind the Redcoat band, sort of tucked in that corner, right in front of where the touchdown got scored. It was an awesome, awesome moment, huge celebration. And then, we were actually driving back from Knoxville that day. And it was not until we're driving home, like many hours after the game, that I found out that Munson had this great call. I didn't know it was the hobnail boot game until like 5 hours after the game. It's only then do you start finding out what other people are saying about it and what, Munson himself had said about it on the radio call. And it became almost this way of reliving the game over and over again, or reliving it over, feeling that sense of elation one more time of, okay, while we were watching it in the stadium, here's how Munson was saying it on the radio, and truly realizing that this was going to be a moment in time that we'd never forget. Going up to Knoxville for that game, the drive back, it was truly special. That for me is my favorite. Let me hop over to Facebook again. Mike Mazzell says Jamari Salyer is going to start this season. I think he probably will. I agree with that. William Moore, on the heels of the hobnail boot, what I said. He says the hobnail boot was great, but there's going to be some property destroyed tonight. Yeah. The most fun one to live over and over again is to replay that 1980 Georgia-Florida call. That's the one that when you replay it over and over again is really pretty good. I also like a couple of the Munson calls that almost seem to get, and I know we're running late here. I'm going to try to squeeze in as much as I can here in the couple minutes we have left. It almost seems like there are a couple of Munson calls that get sort of lost to time, over time. Do y'all remember the call, and you can maybe find this on YouTube. I'm not quite sure if it's there. Our buddies at the UGA Vault probably have this. The 1997 Georgia Tech game when Corey Allen caught the game-winning pass from Mike Bobo. Munson had a great call of that touchdown, and we almost never hear that. I don't know why that is, but we almost never hear it. He said, and it was sort of a hobnail bootish type thing about like we stomped on their hearts, or it's a pretty weird call, I guess, overall. But he's like, we just ripped out their hearts and stomped on it, or something along those lines. That was from the 97 Georgia Tech game. You don't hear that much. I enjoyed his call of the 2006 Muhammad Massaquoi catch against Georgia Tech. That was really one of his last big calls. I don't know that he had another really big call again after that, but that game-winning throw from Matthew Stafford, I thought that Munson had a really good call of that. And so sometimes I think about some of those calls that we don't hear as much anymore. There's that one, and I think it's after Georgia LSU game, where he's talking about everybody trying to come back on the same plane. That plane's going to be rocking and rolling, or some of those. You just don't hear those. I like some of those, maybe what you might think of as like deep cuts, B-sides. I like some of those Munson calls. Sean Manzioni says, BA, why don't we ever have a show in Athens? I know that some of y'all think I'm just talking when I say this, but we are really trying to figure out a way to make this happen. And Austin Moore even says it too, maybe a touring show in every county in Georgia. We have specifically talked about a couple of cities for sure. Jeff and I have talked about these that we are definitely going to try to go to. And like the logistics of this kind of stuff is just sort of tough because I do work in the afternoons. And so, how you figure all of that out, it involves more than just me. You've got a lot of technical stuff that have to be sort of figured out for that. So there's a few dominoes that have to fall in place to make something like this work. It's not like the old days where you just sort of plug in one microphone and do the show. You got a lot more going on in that respect. But this is something that we are very serious about. Jeff and I ourselves, just the two of us, have actually met on this. So we're going to try to do that here pretty soon. Greg Prolago asking about Dominic Sanders and I think he's asking about Dominic Sanders and a undrafted free agent camp invite. I haven't heard on Sanders yet. If y'all know about Dominic Sanders, drop that in to the comment section on one of the comment sections here. I did see obviously where our buddy Jeb Blazevich is heading towards Seattle. The last I checked, we're still waiting to hear where Dom may be going. So hopefully he finds a good home. Stephen Burton asked about the new Grayson coach. I believe he is a UGA grad now. Obviously, for a while, Mickey Kahn, who I think of as a pretty good guy, but Mickey was, very, very close with Dabo Swinney after having been together at Alabama. Mickey was a big Alabama fan, Alabama grad. But the newest Grayson coach, I believe, is a UGA grad. At least that's what I read. Santiago Diarn enjoyed having Kevin Butler on the show. By the way, on the video that we play of Davin Bellamy signing autographs, sometimes in the industry we call that B-roll, Santiago Diarn is one of the guys getting autographs from Davin Bellamy there. So if you ever wonder what Santiago looks like, he's one of the guys getting an autograph from Davin Bellamy in the B-roll industry term that we play of Bellamy from time to time. There he is. Oh, my gosh. How about that? That's our buddy Santiago right there getting ready to get his autograph. Good stuff from him. He may not want me to show that, but I guess I've already done it now. He's a terrific fan of the Georgia Bulldogs and a terrific friend to us here on DawgNation Daily. All right, we got to get ready to get out of here. Thank you so much for being with us. We will be back tomorrow, 10 a.m. for another episode of DawgNation Daily Live, presented by Marco's Pizza. I'm 3 p.m. Eastern time this afternoon. Now, Mike Johnson's on vacation, at least for today. He'll be back on Monday, but I'll be there. We'll have a good time, and we'll have the podcast version of this show up in just a couple of moments, and then we'll see you tomorrow. Y'all have a great day. DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. Back again tomorrow.